Right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We've got people logging on from all over the world, whatever the case is, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us here on the 52 Weeks of Leadership. I had to go back and count right before we started because I don't have that many fingers, and we're up to week 46 already. Wow, it seems like just yesterday. I was over in the studio saying, welcome to week one of this new thing, week 46. We're almost there, ladies and gentlemen, and we're delighted that you could join us today. As always, we'd like to send a special shout out to our sponsor, Geico Careers, who made this possible. Originally we were thinking, do we charge people for this? How are we going to keep this rolling? And then Geico stepped in and said, hey, let us help you make this happen for everybody. So thank you very much to Geico for making this possible. 46 weeks in a row. This week we've got, well, actually, let me say right up front, since we're on week 46, week 52 is coming up, and then the 52 weeks of leadership, it's done. We're over. That's kind of sad. Want to give you a little preview. We're planning on something new. I wanted to do 53 weeks of leadership, but Molly told me I couldn't because it's not a leap year next year. So we've got something new coming up in 2022. Some exciting stuff. More to come on that real soon. But first, wow, what an honor. We've got a very neat presenter with us today that we're going to talk to on an extraordinarily important topic. Christy Joseph is the passionate and influential Senior Vice President of Human Resources, over 20 years of experience, and she works for, oh my goodness, I always say it wrong, and now the pressure's on, Pagula. Forgive me, I'm not a local, I'm from New Orleans. I had to practice that this morning for Pagula Sports and Entertainment. So get this, she oversees HR. We had to write this down. For the Buffalo Bills, maybe you've heard of them, the Buffalo Sabres, the KeyBank Center, the Buffalo Bandits, the Rochester Americans, the Blue Cross Arena, the Rochester Nighthawks, the Harbor Center, the Academy of Hockey, hospitality operations in New York. I can't even pronounce all of that. She does it every day. And she's been with the organization since 2014. She's worked for companies in lots of different industries, from sports and entertainment to tech, oil and gas, healthcare, and retail. So whatever industry you're in, she's probably got some relevant experience for it. She's a graduate from Oswego State University, got her bachelor's degree in HRM. She's a certified senior professional through the Human Resources Certification Institute, certified strategic human resources business partner through the Human Capital Institute, the HR Professional of the Year in 2012 from the Buffalo Niagara Human Resources Association. While she's not doing all of that, I don't know how she has any time. She lives in West Seneca, New York with her husband, Tim, two children, Danny and Gianna, doing gymnastics, hockey, soccer, guitar, drums, and so much other stuff. And she's joining us today. How cool is this to talk to us about authenticity and integrity in your leadership brand, which is always a very relevant topic. Now, like always, we've got everyone muted so that everyone can hear Christy. But if you have any questions as we go through this, please feel free to type them in the chat. We'll have about 5 minutes at the end of this where we can get to them. So that all said, enough for me. Christy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Looking forward to this.
No, we're excited. So, one thing that I always talk about is how, leadership is one of those words that like everybody uses it, but we don't really know what it means. And, you could say the same thing about authenticity too, because I've talked to people who have different definitions. So you've thought about this a lot. You're successful. What does it mean to be an authentic leader?
So I think from my perspective, authenticity is really just being who you are. And what I mean by that is being self-aware, understanding the areas that you really are strong in, but also not forgetting your blind spots. We all have areas of opportunity, areas that, we may have limitations in, and just understanding that, there are things that you're great at, there's things that you need to work on, and being vulnerable and open to that. I also think from an authenticity perspective, it's not about me, right? Being authentic, it's really about our organization. It's about the people in an organization as well. So, I always say when people, people who've worked with me over my career, I always say, what you see is what you get. And, being authentic, I am who I am at work, when I'm home, when I'm with friends, that's just who I am. And I bring myself to every aspect of my life. That's how I see authenticity.
So let me follow up on that. I know for most people, we think leaders, managers, we think they have to be perfect, right? But you're saying, no, share your flaws. What do you say to the junior manager who comes into PSE and they're like, okay, I have to pretend like I'm perfect because now people are looking up to me. That's difficult to do, right? To be vulnerable with your employees.
Yes, it absolutely is difficult because people think when they're in leadership roles that they're supposed to have all the answers. And they think that, I'm in a leadership role, so I need to have the answers and I can't say that I don't know and I made a mistake. Where I think from being an authentic leader, it's showing that you don't know. It's saying, okay, I made a mistake and this is how I learned from it. It's okay when you're going into meeting with individuals or talking about a topic. If somebody asks you a question that you're not sure of, just saying, I don't know, but I'm going to follow up with you in the next 24 hours to give you an answer. And I think that's where that authenticity and vulnerability comes. It builds the trust within the organization too, that they know when you are responding with feedback that you have the information needed. And if you really aren't aware of a topic, you'll either bring a subject matter expert in or you'll find the information out and follow up. So it is definitely something that I've had to learn throughout my career. Being in human resources for over 20 years now, starting off in leadership roles at a very young age, there were times that I felt I needed to know everything. And in those situations didn't always turn out the best. So it's okay to be vulnerable. And I think as a leader in an organization, by you showing that and leading by example and admitting if there's a mistake and you need to make a change and just saying, I'm not sure, let me bring someone else in. It then also gives others in the organization the okay to behave that way as well, and shows that, this is how a leader should be behaving.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And actually, one thing you said that I'll jump back to. I do something similar in my class. If someone asks a question I don't know, I always say, okay, I don't know the answer. I'm not going to make up an answer. I'm not going to pretend I know the answer. But next class, I will know the answer, or I'll research it. I'll find it. So it's good to hear you say that. So maybe I'm doing something right in class after all. But a lot's been written about this, right? About authenticity and leadership and authentic leadership, whatever that means. In like throughout the 21st century, I think the first big book was in 2005. But one question that keeps coming up when I'm talking to people, at least, and that I've struggled with is like there's limits, right? Like how transparent can and should you be? Like can you speak to your experience? Are there times when leaders should be more transparent, but they're not, or maybe times when they shouldn't be so transparent, but they are? Where do you see the limitations there?
Yes, so that is definitely a difficult balance from a leadership role. And I think when you have the trust built with your team by being that authentic leader, by showing vulnerability, that when the time comes that you're unable to be transparent, and transparent is kind of a difficult term because people's expectations of transparency are different as well. So understanding the audience that you are speaking with and trying to understand really what they need and to make them feel comfortable with whatever situation there is. When you're in an executive position, there are times that there may be shifts in business or different areas that we may be looking into from an innovation perspective, and we might not be at the time to share that information. And really, it's just because we're looking into it, and it's not really at the point to bring everyone in to make people even be concerned or distract from really what our organizational focus is at that time. So there's different levels of transparency, and I've used this, and I know many other leaders have as well, that if people are hearing that there's something going on and they ask a question, it's okay to say, listen, I don't have information at this time to share about that. I understand that people are hearing that this is going on. I will commit to you that I'll share information when there is information to share. But at this point, let's focus on this, which is what we know we need to do and where we need to be. So I feel that transparency in times where you really can't be overtly transparent, just acknowledging and sharing that you will make sure that you bring information to them at the time that you can. And then there's other times you can be very transparent. You just really have to, as a leader, understand the subject at hand, when you can be, and just the best way to be as open with your team as possible.
Well, you're bringing me back to when I was in the corporate world, and there were so many times when I was asked questions and I really didn't know the answer, but I felt like I'm supposed to be the leader. And I'm just going to put this out there. I made something up, and half the time I wasn't right, probably more than half the time. And it really came back to bite me. So there's something to that. that brings me to my next question. You know, almost everything I've ever read about authentic leadership says that you've got to be really self-aware for it to work. And I mean, you're talking about, you know, be comfortable talking about your weaknesses. Well, a lot of us really aren't. A lot of us don't even know what our weaknesses are. You know, a lot of us, we have blind spots, right? And as my pastor says, if you don't think you have blind spots, that's your blind spot, right? So what are your thoughts on self-awareness as a leader, getting to know what your own strengths and weaknesses are when you need to say, hey, I don't know the answer, but I'll find out. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very important to take the time as a leader to invest in yourself and just really understand where you're at, not just skill set wise, but also just as a person in your style of work. So there are many assessments that you can take to really understand if it's your personality, your communication style. There's also 360s, which are great because it gives people the opportunity to provide feedback from many different groups that work with you. And also just opening the conversation up, giving people the okay that that feedback is what you're looking for. So in one-on-ones, if it's team meetings, so you have to be open to that feedback, and the way you receive the feedback will be the way that you obtain future feedback. So if you obtain feedback critically and you don't, you know, if you're not thankful for the feedback, you know, you may not be getting great feedback moving forward. It is important that you open yourself up. You thank, you know, the individuals who've participated and given you feedback. And then you also want to share what you're doing with the feedback. Because as we all know, there's many surveys maybe that we've all taken or things that we've participated in. We take the time to give the feedback and then we don't hear anything about it. So it's very important to show your commitment to improving yourself and understanding areas that you are very good at and understanding areas that really people need more from you and making that commitment and communicating. So you do need to take that time as a leader to really understand who you are. And I joke, every assessment I take, I give my husband, I'm like, this is why I am who I am. Take a read. This is, you know, here's some research to show, you know, why I may react one way or another. So it's who you are, and you just want to open yourself up and learn, and it just helps you be better.
Okay, there were two main parts of that answer that I heard, and I want to dive into both of them really quick. The first one, you said assessments, and you may not be comfortable answering this, but I'm going to ask just in case. Are there any assessments that you've taken that you feel like, wow, everybody should take this? This is so informative. Does anything spring to mind?
Well, there's so many assessments, so I don't want to discount other assessments that are out there. There's some very in-depth assessments like a Big Five or a Hogan. There's emotional intelligence assessments. I do like the DISC assessment, which is more on personality, which is very easy to apply within an organization. So those are some that, you know, depending on how in-depth you would like to get, there's so many assessments out there, but those are a few.
Okay, we'll take that answer because you picked a lot of our favorite ones and a lot of the ones we do at the Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. So fantastic.
I did not know that, I swear.
Yeah, she didn't. So yeah, I put myself at risk there. Thank you very much. So the other half of what you're saying, you said, you know, you can go to people and, you know, tell me my weaknesses, tell me what I'm going wrong. And that kind of leads into another topic that's big in authentic leadership, which is difficult conversations. You know, they tend to be simple in theory, but much harder in practice. And this can be in terms of asking others to let you know the weakness, or probably more frequently for most of us when you're a manager, you feel like I have to have a difficult conversation about someone who I know is trying, who I personally like, who's just not making the bar here. Do you have some thoughts about how to have these conversations authentically and effectively?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is where, you know, you keep things objective. So when you go into a conversation like subjectively, well, I heard this or I think this, you know, it just puts people in a different place. So I think when there's an issue, I really focus on seeking to understand first before making a decision. So say someone's performance or behavior, something's trailed off, you know, looking at that person and focusing and saying, you know, help me understand, you know, this is where your performance really was. This is where it is now. Is there something going on? Is there something that you need assistance with? Is there something that they're kind of a blocker within the business that you need assistance with? Seeking to understand first and asking objectively so that it doesn't put the person on the defensive, to have that really open conversation. Difficult conversations, a lot of people shy away from, and it's understandable. We don't want to go in and tell someone they're not doing the right job, or they're not working as well here, or their behavior here, impacted somebody negatively. Those are difficult conversations. But if you have the relationship with the individual that you have to speak to, or group of people that you have to speak to, and you really bring it objectively, seek to understand and have a discussion, and instead of making it personal, really make it about, this is why, this is how it impacted the organization, or this impacted this client, or it impacted this customer. That's where I feel that those difficult conversations are more productive, because it's not personal. It's really about what has been done at hand and how we need to focus on what the impact is.
Fantastic. And it's always nice when I come to these and there's an executive like you talking, and I hear you saying things that, like, that's the same stuff in our textbooks that comes out in the research. All right, so we're triangulating. We've got this. That foundation of trust is important. Let me ask one more on the topic of authenticity and leading a team. What about when, and this is something that I've read a lot about as an important competency of the authentic leader, what about when you've got a team member who's got a minority opinion, like someone who's got this idea that, there may be some merit there, but nobody else in the room seems to agree. How does the authentic leader handle minority opinions?
I think it's very important, even from an inclusion perspective, that difference of thought and feedback and how people perceive what a decision might be. It's very important to understand. So depending on how that minority opinion is brought up, if it's productive in that group setting, I would probe and ask questions there, help us understand, explain why, interested in hearing your perspective. Depending on if it's not as productive, maybe it's a situation that someone's kind of angry about or upset about. That's where I kind of read the room, the situation, and either take a pause, with that person separately. I think if you discount that immediately, then you really aren't being inclusive and trying to get to the best answer. It's just ensuring that that feedback is effective and productive. So then reaching out to that individual and learning, understanding, finding out what that is. And there may be a piece in there, and at times there are, where they're like, wait, we need to take a pause. This is not the right direction. Gaining that understanding and then taking the time, instead of just, okay, I heard you, but we're still doing X. Then you really didn't take the time to understand and think through what that feedback was. Then the decision may still be what the original decision was. But I think going back to that person, sharing the why, and also go back to the group that this was brought up in, and indicating like, look, we took this offline, we looked into it, this is the why, and this is what direction we're moving into. So I think it's very important. And I think having that healthy, constructive feedback is important to push an organization forward. And as leaders, we need to encourage it in a productive, effective way.
That's fantastic. And you've given a lot of really tangible, tactical ways you can do that. That's great. Thank you. I see, like, this always flies by. We're already over halfway out of time, and I haven't gotten to the second half of the conversation here with authenticity and integrity. So as I get into that, I'll remind everybody, if you've got any questions for Christy, she'll answer anything other than the spreads for the next Bills and Sabres game. Don't bother with that. I already tried. So the other half of this is integrity. Oh, I was saying, put it in the chat if you have a question. Other half of this is integrity. And I know that's a key word for you at PSE. And it's another word that different people seem to have different definitions of. So let me ask you, from a leadership perspective, what do you think that really means? How do you put that into practice?
Really, I think integrity is simple. It's just doing the right thing when no one's looking or when everyone's looking. It's something I talk to my children about when they're at other places, act as if I'm there with you, making the right decisions, making sure that you are acting in a way that you would if somebody was around or if they weren't around, doing the right thing for the organization, for your team. Really, it's just making sure that you do the same when someone's looking or someone's not looking, is how, in simple terms, that's how I see integrity.
Well, I'm sure it's not like this at PSE, but at a lot of companies I've worked with, I'm sorry to say, there have been a lot of people who didn't. And for a while, I'd count myself in among some of these where, we're acting differently based on who we're with. We're trying to make the right people feel good. We're working our way up the chain by, not necessarily valuing and practicing integrity and being ourselves. And one thing that I talk to a lot of people about that's really concerning, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you catch the fakes? How do you catch the people who really aren't authentic, but they've figured out how to fake integrity? What do you look for?
Well, consistency is really how I see from integrity. Uh, Anybody can act a certain way for a certain period of time. And there are definitely individuals that we all come across that, depending on who they might be in the presence of, maybe they act a little bit different. And that goes back to that core authenticity, that you are who you are, no matter who you're interacting with. So really from that, I guess the fakes perspective is that it just takes time. This is where I think listening to feedback is very important. Ensuring that you don't think of the opinion that you have on someone as the only opinion that's out there. And just ensure that, through time, consistency in different interactions, that will play out. And as an organization, just not to be blind to the feedback that you receive, and ensure that you look into anything that is brought up with an open perspective and objective perspective as well. So, but with time, that will come out.
So let me follow up with the hardest question I've asked you so far. You said with time, and I agree, with time, you can see how consistent people are, but is there any way you can avoid hiring the wrong person? Is there anything you think that we could look for to make sure? Because I had this struggle where I would be fooled basically in an interview. Have you learned anything along those lines?
Absolutely. I mean, that has happened. Actually, there's one that stands out. It was earlier in my career, and our management team that was there, we were completely fooled. So it does happen. But since then, looking at that as a learning opportunity, and even what organizations have to assist. I mean, that's where, pre-employment assessments are very important, because, that's something that can help confirm or deny or give you additional probing questions when you're meeting with a candidate. Also very important to have the right questions from an interview perspective. Ensure that it's really focused on behaviors and focused on examples and information that is really applicable to the role that you're in. Other things, depending on roles that you're recruiting for, there are also like work assignments that can be done, project assignments or pieces that you can have someone work on to get a little bit more of a flavor of their work style and how they would meet an objective within your organization. And then another piece too are panel interviews. So that's where you have a standard set of questions so that each person that's part of that panel does receive the same questions, but that you have multiple individuals that have different perspectives or would be working with these individuals differently, have that opportunity to sit down and meet with the candidate and then getting that feedback. So if you have a multi-prong approach from a recruitment perspective, that's a way that consistency and pieces could show in that process. And that you just need to make sure that you have that open perspective, listening to the feedback and taking the information at hand and making the best decision possible.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know, at least for me, I usually try to think of, okay, where's my one silver bullet? And what you're saying is that you really got to hit it from a lot of different perspectives and angles to get at this. And that's, our minds don't initially go there. We're always looking for one solution, but I think you're absolutely right. Thank you. That's very practical and tactical. Okay, and what little time we got left, I want to shift a little bit to an area that I know is very near and dear to your heart, and that we've actually worked together on at PSE, which is DEI. It gets a lot of attention these days, and the I, inclusion, that's literally what inclusion means, is that everyone feels free to be their authentic self. So this is definitely related to authentic leadership and integrity. So can I ask, in the time we've got left, how does your authentic leadership support DEI? What have you done around that at PSE that you're pretty proud of that maybe the rest of us could learn from?
Absolutely. I mean, what we've really focused on from a DEI perspective is having a DEI council that's really focused on what we can do as an organization. We have been able to really create a purpose statement so that our organization is speaking the same language. There are many definitions to diversity, equity, inclusion, but what that means for our organization. So we have a clear picture and we're able to communicate this clearly to the organization. We've also received information from all of our employees. We've reached out to understand. So we're not getting the feedback from a small population, that we really are trying to understand where we're at. And I think that's part of that self-awareness. We talk about authentic leadership, but as an organization, to be authentic, we do have to take that feedback and understand what we do well and understand the areas that we need to grow and make a commitment to that. And we have great commitment from ownership, executive leadership, all the way through our organization, which is key. And I feel very lucky for that. There are many organizations that are still putting their case for diversity to leadership, and we don't have that. We know how important it is, and having that commitment and sharing that throughout the organization is really key. And then also we've incorporated some trainings within our business, and from our executive leadership team too, we've really focused on 360s to help us be more self-aware and focus on what we need to do. So we've really hit a few things within this last year regarding that, and we just look forward to really diving in and continuing this journey by receiving feedback and making sure we do touch base, get pulses, and make sure that we're measuring against what we've put in place.
Great stuff. And it sounds like it all ties back into authenticity for everyone, for the leaders, for the employees. It serves a lot of ends. Great. Thank you very much for sharing all of this with us. We're coming up on 12:30, so I'll open it up for just a couple of minutes for questions. If you've got one, feel free to put it in the chat. And I see I've got one from Mary, who's, oh, excuse me. Mary said, if she's comfortable, could she share an example of a great question to use in an interview to get at authenticity? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So a couple questions I do like actually, which are really simple, but you can tell by the mannerisms of someone when I ask these questions. I actually say, if I were to call, your supervisor up, what would the strengths and areas of opportunity, what would they say about you? And I also ask about coworkers, because obviously collaboration is so critical within organizations as well. And it's very interesting with those couple simple questions. It puts the candidates in their current situation. And I've received various responses, very open feedback. Some people pause and hesitate. And I feel that those have been just a couple questions just about how, what they would say about them, that has shared some really interesting feedback in an interview process.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for sharing those. I've got one more from Patrick, who said, how did you start your focus on DEI at PSC?
So really, DEI has been within our organizations a while. We're very lucky because our leagues also know how important this is. But when we were ready to just start our DEI council and really formulate a group, what we did is first was identifying an executive sponsor that ownership would appoint. And then also it was then reaching out to our staff and asking who was interested in what DEI meant to them. And it was to ensure that we were getting individuals across all of our portfolio organizations to make sure we had representation from different areas, different people, and we had that just different thoughts that were brought to the group. And then when we got the group together, it was really just a kickoff to indicate what we've done, but really what our focus is, and that it's us to determine what we want to do and what are critical areas of focus. So the council really started talking about, what's most critical to them. We reached out to all of our staff and we were able to come up with our pillars that are very important in our purpose statement. So we really started off with that structure. And then we also have now rolled out committees at a couple of our entities to ensure that they align specifically with those organizations.
Okay, that's a pretty good blueprint. That's all the questions I see. So I'm going to ask you one more. And I love to ask this whenever I do the interviews. So your topic is leading with authenticity and integrity. And I think if we're all going to be honest and authentic with ourselves, we could all do a better job of that. So is there one thing that you think, and this could be something you've already said, but one thing that jumps out at you that, I could start doing this week that would move me down that path? Is there anything that here's something powerful we could try tomorrow?
Mm-hmm. For me, I think it's just that vulnerability. Just open yourself up. So if there's a conversation, someone's asking you, just be open about your feedback, be open about a mistake that you made, be open about a challenge. Share how you would normally react to a situation. That vulnerability is really key in connecting with individuals. Everyone is looking to leaders in organizations to see how they act, to see how they present themselves. And when we are vulnerable, it brings that human aspect to a title. And a title is just a title. Who you are is really how you impact an organization, no matter what level you are. And that vulnerability is that human connection, which really is that builds that trust and helps you kind of be that authentic self and show that you care. So I would say just being vulnerable, which is very hard if you're not comfortable. So I would say try that.
Yeah, it's not just very hard. It's against human nature, especially in a leadership position. But you're absolutely right. The research backs up what you just said. If you're in a leadership position, whether you like it or not, you're a role model. You're setting the tone. So that is fantastic advice. So that's coming to you guys from research and practice. Well, Christy Joseph, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Virtual round of applause to you. Thanks for taking the time to join us here on the 52 Weeks of Leadership. It means a lot to us, and I'm sure to everybody on the call from all over the world.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
So coming up on the next exciting installment, we got some virtual applauses coming through for you right now. Coming up on the next exciting installment, week 47, a week from today. We hope you'll enjoy us. We kind of got a star-studded lineup for the month of November. Michael Weiner from the United Way, the president and CEO, of the United Way, will be joining us to talk about participatory leadership, just getting everybody involved, kind of a related topic. So we hope you will join us for that. Again, same time, same place next Monday at 12 o'clock. Till then, have a great week. We'll see you next time.